All right. And we're on air. Let's see if anybody is joining in. Mike's on his way, apparently. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Mike.
Mike and Mike. Right, so I'm going to have to get familiar with using this Hangout because this is the first time I've
Sure.
I've actually used this. So,
And I'm not sure if Mike knows. I think his microphone's muted in case he wants to talk.
I figured the microphone doesn't work on this headset, so I'm going to use the laptop.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Yeah. I just pulled out the cord.
So what am I filling off? Hope other people have been able to join. I have no real idea what's going on at the moment.
I'm like that most of the time.
All right, so can you? There you go. All right, we can see some stuff happening. No, I lost it. There you go. All right.
I see it.
All right, so web forms for marketers. Let's have a brainstorming 101 session on web forms for marketers, and we introduce you to the world of pain. I'm not sure you quite know what you've let yourself in for yet, but Mike knows what's going on.
I do.
All right, so for you guys should hopefully know who I am. For everybody else that may have joined us on air, and hopefully it is streaming, I am Camrys German, and I work as a freelance Sitecore consultant at the moment over here in the UK at the moment, and 4-time Sitecore MVP as of last Thursday. And I'm not enough celebration yet, though, unfortunately. But, and I'm currently working for ARM, who are the manufacturer. Well, they don't manufacture anything actually. They just design all chips and a whole bunch of other really intelligent stuff, far beyond me. But there we are. They find me in there. And obviously, so where you can find me on WordPress, Twitter, Stack Overflow, and come on over to Slack, as I'm sure a lot of people will be after using this for a bit. We've got a lovely little web forms for marketers room in there. And if anybody is on air, either go over to the Slack room or start tweeting us with a WFFM 101 hashtag, and I'll keep a watch on it and try and pick it up and answer some questions if people have got some things that they need answering. So, web forms for marketers, or as you'll get to know it, it will be web forms for marketers. It's also known as web forms for marketeers. Well, it used to be known as that, I think. Some people still call it web forms for marketeers, and it always reminds me of musketeers for some reason. I can imagine our marketeers are actually quite goofy, like some of these as well. Sometimes fits in quite well. So why web forms for marketers module? Well, basically it's marketing teams. They're always wanting stuff, and we've always got more interesting stuff to be getting on with, and it's always just a quick little form here and a quick little form there, and we've got this little campaign running, and we just want to grab people's email addresses for harassment and selling them stuff and sending them LinkedIn invites and all that good stuff. Obviously as well, reports and analytics, quite an important one on these. You want to gather some insight into your forms and how they're doing and how they're working and which ones work, which ones don't work, and tie those into your campaigns, all that good stuff. You obviously want to style them to match your website and your general marketing, branding needs. It's also quite useful to be able to create multiple forms and also to be able to create and configure multiple submit actions, as in sending data to lots of places or emails or back-end systems or lots of good stuff like that. Also got form validation, the usual stuff. Is it an email, required fields, values between, max lengths, minimum lengths. And it's easy-ish to extend. We'll sort of come back to that a bit later. There's lots of sort of nuances around web forms for marketers. And theoretically, the biggest advantage is once it's done, and there really isn't any real developer involvement. You can just leave your marketers to spin up a million web forms for collecting lots of different emails and other stuff. I don't know, but it's always comes back to this. If you guys could just quickly spin up a form for us, that would be awesome. And we've generally got much more better and interesting things and challenging things to be getting on with. So web forms for marketers has actually been around for a very long time. The first version was released back in July 2008, according to the release notes. I don't think I wasn't using Sitecore back then, so never used it then, but available since Sitecore 6. I think I first came into contact with it on my first project back in 2010, and that was a classic ASP.NET Web Forms version. The MVC version was launched in Web Forms for Marketers 2.4, which was released back in October of 2014 and was compatible with Sitecore 7.2. I think there was actually a lot of people, as you know, MVC's been around since Sitecore 7, but there was a lot of people waiting around to move across to MVC actually just for this module. It is a very, very popular module. And since 8.0, Sitecore 8 has been released. The releases of the Web Forms for Marketers modules have been more aligned with the releases of the core products. There was there was usually a delay, so the core product would be launched, and then several weeks later, the Web Forms for Marketers module would be launched, and people are sort of hanging around in limbo waiting for that. And as of a new Bootstrap version has been launched, so some Bootstrap front-end stuff happening. I haven't really used Bootstrap much. I used various other incarnations of front-end frameworks, but don't really get involved in it too much. Weirdly, the Bootstrap version was released for 7.2 first, back in, I think it was around July, August last year. And now for Sitecore 8, since update 5 actually, not update 6, update 5 or 6 I believe, and 8.1 is actually also on the bootstrapped version. And the data, this is a bit of a, so this is another one which sort of threw people a bit with, so prior to XDB launching, so anything before Sitecore 7.2 and lower, the data was stored in Microsoft SQL Server. There was an additional Sitecore WFFM database that you attach, and the data would go into there. That required an explicit save to database action when you did something on the forms. Since Sitecore XP, the experience one, the data is actually stored in XDB now in Mongo. bit of a typo there. There's no save action required, and also beware of upgrades. I've obviously need to beware of return carriages as well, but obviously beware of upgrades if you're going from 7.2 up to XDB. There'll be some post-install steps that you'll need to do to get the data into Mongo. And as of Sitecore 8.1, we've come back to being able to store data in Microsoft SQL Server again. This is because you can obviously run CMS only mode without any analytics, so this needs to be stored somewhere. And the configuration string, you can just add a connection string config for WFM, and Sitecore magically picks this up and will configure it. There's a couple of other things in there with remote actions and stuff. We'll kind of go through that a little bit later as well. So the installation is pretty simple, really. Go to SDN or dev.sitecore.net, download the module for the specific version of web forms formatters of Sitecore. Just be aware that if you're downloading for Sitecore 8, the zip file you get is actually a zip file of the module, and inside that zip file you'll find two files, one for CM and one for CD. So if you try to install the zip file you download directly from the Sitecore site, it won't install because it's a zip within a zip. You just install it using the standard Sitecore installation wizard from the Sitecore desktop. Be careful when you read this. Nobody ever reads the notes. Just like all license agreements, we kind of sign our lives away and don't read it and just click accept. There are actually some notes on there which are really, really worth reading, and I'll show you a screenshot of that. Be sure to run the SQL script on the analytics database or the reporting database on SQL Server. It needs to create some tables, without which you won't get your reports. There's a change required to the web config, and there's also a final step as part of the installation, which is to add placeholder restrictions, but that doesn't do anything too clever. It's just a nice screen to add the restrictions. It's just your normal kind of placeholder restrictions. And the good old spinning wheel of death. I'm sure we're all getting kind of used to that. If you get this, check the logs. There's probably something going on in the background. If it's just hanging and it's not doing anything for a really, really long time, then check the logs. It does take a while to download, to install the module. There's quite a lot of stuff going on in the background, but my usual one is I've installed a clean version of Sitecore, and I haven't got Mongo running, or I haven't configured Mongo, and I try to install the module and it just hangs. You can disable the analytics and it will install just fine, and obviously don't forget to publish. Right, I think we should jump into some code and some front-endy stuff. Let's jump into some front-endy stuff first. Right. Alright, so I've actually gone with a demo on Sitecore 8 update 3, purely because this was the one that I'm most familiar with at the moment. And I'll talk about, I think I've got an install Sitecore 7.2 that I can show you, and I'll show you some stuff from Sitecore 8 with the bootstrap stuff, because that's going to cause a bit of pain when trying to customize and personalize and that kind of stuff. I'm going to have to drag one of these over. Do that. Right, so in the menu, you'll get yourselves a web forms for marketers section once it's installed. Most of the time, I don't think you're actually going to.
Looks like your laptop's about to die. You might want to plug it in.
Yeah, is that me?
Yeah.
All right. Probably not going to help, is it?
No.
There you go. All right.
Awesome.
Okay. Cheers, Mike. So yeah, so you get this menu added in, but you're not. I don't think you're really going to be using this too much actually. And as you know, most users don't really go onto the desktop too often anyway. So let's head on over to section. And I'll just. So this is the launch Sitecore website. I've a demo site really doesn't particularly do anything. There's not anything on there which is of any importance. So get rid of this to. So the way you would add the forms is within our placeholders. You'd obviously need to allow a form to be added. Now, there's two types of forms. There's a form, which is actually a ASP.NET form, ASP.NET Web Forms form, and then you got your MVC form. Obviously, put your placeholder restrictions in for the type of site you have running. If you're running a Web Forms version, then use a the form version, and obviously if you're using an MVC version, then use this one. So this is the MVC version of Launch Sitecore. So just add the form, and in the current version, luckily you'll get these three options. So you can create a blank form, you can select a form to copy, and you can select an existing form. If you're running anything earlier than Sitecore 8 Update 5, then this final option is not available. There's a blog post on my site with an update for this, and this is actually what I'm running here. But let's go ahead and create a new form, and then we can create a new goal, or we can select an existing one, and then we can enable form dropout tracking. And what this does is it uses Ajax to capture what the user is entering, and in the background we'll send that data off, which will in theory allow you to analyze what people have entered before. If they don't submit the form, you'll get some nice stats as to how many are completed versus how many are dropping off, and what kind of data has been entered. If you've ever gone to a website and you've sort of typed some information in but haven't then completed that form, and then wonder why you get phone calls later on or follow-up emails, and it's because of this kind of weird stalkerish kind of thing. But I guess it's some marketing stuff in there, and then we'll just create a form. All right, so nothing there, obviously. So it's just an empty form. With the module, you don't edit in page as such, but there's a edit button here for the form. Click that open, and that opens up the Web Forms for Marketers Designer. And this is it really. You can go in, you can add a form, put in some details, you can make it wide. You have some default types of fields in here. There's obviously single line, multiple line. There's these password ones, email, telephone, date pickers, file uploads, checkboxes. You've got list types. There's even a capture type form field here as well. So I'll pick email here. And
do you have to be in a specific security group to see this form?
Yes.
Like as a designer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's a couple of groups, and I covered in it is in the on the documentation.
Okay.
It is available in the documentation, and obviously on the item itself that I'm adding this form onto, I will need read and write access. So I can also put in some, I can make this required, not required. Let's make the email required. That would kind of be a bit of an obvious one. So with some of the non-standard forms, you can, so here I can increase the amount of rows I want put in. I can put in some help text. I can select some CSS classes, and these are just the default ones. We can add additional ones. We can remove these ones and put in just our ones. Provide some default values in these fields, as well as allowing some validation. Now, there's some standard validator types in here, numbers only, letters only, but we can also put in a custom one, which will then allow us to put some regular expression in. We can force minimum, maximum lengths, and there's a whole bunch of analytics-y type of things going on here as well. And some rules, I'll cover that slightly later, I think. Save and close that. And there you go. It's a very, very basic form. And I can't remember what I called this one. So I'm running in live mode at the moment, hopefully. And there you go, there's our form. Go in and try to submit, and we got some default validators. I can put in some info, and there you go, it's recognizing it's not an email, and then the message disappears. Off we go, details are in, submit, everybody's happy. Now within, let's go back to this form. So within this form, you've got a submit action, and this form almost acts like a has its own actions attached to it. There's a let's show this success action, because that's what we just saw. So you can redirect the user to a different page if you want to, and you just obviously just select whatever that's going to be. Or the other option there is what we just saw was the message on that page, which was thank you for filling out the form, and that's just set here. The user can just fill that in, and everyone's very, very basic message there, but you can put it in whatever you like. So pick whichever one is going to be most useful. There's also a few additional sections here. For example, there was this title section, which was here, which was this title that you saw on this form here. And we can put in some introduction text just to make that easy, put some whatever information you need about the form, or whatever information you need in there. Additionally, there's a footer text as well. Yeah, and as you'd expect, these just appear almost like labels within the form. The other concept we have here is the save actions. So remember, I was telling you in pre-XDB there was a specific save action, which was save to database, and you had to pick that save to database action in order to save it. In Sitecore XDB versions, it automatically saves everything to the database. So you don't specifically need to add the save to database action. What you will need to add is whatever you want this form to do. And there's a whole bunch of them which are out of the box. Add to contacts, change password, etc. Great item. The most popular one is probably the send email message. That's probably the one that most marketers use, as well as the engagement plans. Adding to the engagement plans and registering campaigns and conversions and that kind of thing. There's some, I think with the S4S connector, for example, you will get a save to Salesforce action in there. I have a link at the end of my slide deck, which was one that I saw by, can't remember the name now, I think it was Dave Lee, which was a web forms for marketers to anything, which allows you to configure a bunch of RESTful type services. But the save actions are actually fairly easy to configure. I'll add in a send to email message, for example. Now, some of these actions have additional editors. So the email message, for example, is one of them. Click Edit. It'll pop up a form. You can then send it to whoever it is. Send that. BCC people in. You can also pick. Yeah, it's not working. In theory, if this worked, you should be able to pick a drop list of fields that you've selected from your actual form. And I'm gonna have to see why that's not working in a second.
I wonder if it's a Chrome issue. You in Chrome?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously put in. That's it. Put it in for now. Doesn't really matter. And then you can put in your details of the email. Also allows you to then pick the fields from your form. So the more fields you have, the more of these you can put in, which will then get auto-populated. Into your email message. Now, there are a lot of quirks with the web forms for marketers. This kind of looks a bit weird, but if you just drag that along a little bit, eventually it will reveal the design and the HTML buttons like you would in any rich text editor in any other part of Sitecore. And then go in and you can see it adds in some funky stuff happening in the background for each of those fields. These are the field IDs. So each of these emails, although they look like you could just copy paste this into another email message on a different form, be careful, because these backing numbers might not be the same, and it may therefore break. It should, in theory, actually, there's a whole bunch of rules that it follows, and there's some pipelines and stuff as to how it falls back, but there's lots of little quirks like this, which just be wary of if you have to kind of go back and debug. And you can obviously go in and put in a bunch of links to other parts of Sitecore. So you get this funkiness with the windows because of window within modal within modal within modal, and you end up with modalception. Now the the send message is then now configured to send an email on when this message is filled up. Okay. Just gonna save this. So this is filled in. Where my form? There you go. My form is here. If you're using MVC on the actual form itself, if you go to the form itself and scroll down, there is an option for is MVC form, and that will allow you to actually use Ajax for the posts rather than a full-on post and cause a full page reload. Oh, just to go back to that form, there is a Forms tab here as well, Forms ribbon. So you got the same options from the content editor. You can go in and edit the form from here as well. And you got access to the reports and save actions and form verifications as well. So just to show you that, start putting some data in. You can see it starts to actually throw back, pull back to the server on each time you're entering data and you're tabbing across different fields. It will actually start to send that information back. So this is how you get dropout tracking and see when people are actually starting to fill out the form, at what point they're dropping out of the form, what information they have filled in. That's quite useful information. And submitted. Obviously doesn't like to okay. I think I've got a redirect action on here. So it's trying to do a redirect, but it can't. So this is one of the quirks with the Ajax. With the Ajax submits, if you try to use a redirect action to redirect it to, say, a thank you page, it won't work with the Ajax forms. So you can only do that with your standard postback forms. One of the problems with some of the Ajax-y type stuff it does is it's not lightweight Ajax. It will make a full, essentially you'll return the entire rendered page and then snip out the bit that it needs to do to say, here's a thank you message and do like a div replacement. So don't expect it to be very, very nice Ajax. It's not. So this is one of the not so nice things about this. It's kind of like the old ASP.NET update panels where it's very, very easy to get set up with, but it's not something that you want in this kind of day of rest and that kind of stuff. It has, oh, it has sent the email. Okay, there's something else a bit funny going on. So I have received the emails. So there you go. One of the many quirks of web forms for marketers. It's also possible to use query string parameters. I've actually never used these, so this will be a strange one if I can get these working. And I don't think it works in this version of Sitecore. Let's see if I can get the version 8. I'll see if I can show this on the version 8. But there is, in version 8.1, there is an option to allow query string parameters. And what that will essentially, what that will allow you to do is, there you go, read query string. There you go, it's this option that I was looking for. So if you enable this read query string value, in theory, what it will allow you to do is pass in parameters to the form using query string. So I probably haven't named my fields very well, and then actually for this to work. But you can essentially pass in values like this to pre-populate these fields. So that's the very basics of how to get the form up and running. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Perhaps the installation is more complicated than the usage of it.
Yeah. I think for the users, for the most part, it is quite simple if it all works. For the developers, it's where it starts to become a bit more complex, and there are some nuances in trying to get it running.
Once you get it up and going, how often do you find yourself interacting with the marketer so they understand, oh, this is how you do it, or oh, this is a quirk that we didn't tell you about? Is it like you're hand-holding the marketers, or once it's working, you just let them go do the thing?
So for myself, there's various things that I found with the marketers. They generally want a set of forms, and they will, once you create those set of forms, they're kind of happy to just reuse those and tweak them and make copies of them and that kind of stuff. And then something will break and they'll come back and say this isn't working, and then that's when sort of most of the headache starts. But once you've got the initial set of forms up and running, it is much easier. Like I said, one of the quirks with, I guess it was 7.5. I really haven't used Sitecore 7.5 at all, but I guess it was 7.5 and earlier versions of 8, at least up until update 6, which just came out last October or so. The insert form wizard, which I showed you earlier, let me just spin up another page. It's this wizard was a bit lacking, and then what actually happened was the only options were these first two. And most of the time, actually, it's just the same. You've got a set of forms that you just want to reuse throughout your site. But the only option was to actually copy a form or to create a blank one. So you'd end up copying it. And what that would end up with is, I'll show you what that happens in this one. So let's select that form. And that's great. So it now looks like I've got this same form back on this page, right? But actually what's happened is it's created two versions of this form. Now what will happen is the user will come here and then edit a field here and then go, oh, why hasn't it ended up on this page? Well, it's a copy, so it's not going to, you got to then manually copy and paste it. They got to manually recreate those forms. So that's like one of the quirks that I found with the earlier version, and we ended up spawning, I don't know, like tens of the same form essentially, just to try and get this stuff up and running. The other way I've used it is just to put it on standard values of an item, and therefore when they create the item, the form's just on there, and they're kind of happy, and it's just linked to a form, and off they go and remove it if they want to remove it, or add content around it.
Do you create the forms in like a development environment? No. And then package it up in a module and then deploy it into the content management, or do you just go and create brand new?
Oh, okay, yeah. Yes. So we're going with this. Yes, we will generally create it in a development environment. I mean, the forms I've showed you so far are very basic, and I'll go into some of the save actions and things and how to extend that in a little while. But generally, we will create locally and then test it and then push it up through the environment. And at some point, those forms will become the master version of those forms will become the production instance, because they will be edited over time. So generally, yeah, you will create it locally and then package it up in whatever form you're going to package it up, and then push it up. So let me take you into the guts of the module, and some of this stuff will start to make a bit more sense. So the module, all the module information sits in System, Modules, Web Forms, and Marketers. There are some templates. I don't think I've actually ever edited these templates, to be honest with you. I don't ever recall having to do anything with these. I guess you could, if you want to really dive into it. There are some sample forms, so do take a look at these. Quite a bit of information on there that you can use. I can show you one very quickly. Demo form is a pretty good one, and the reason it's a very good one is it pretty much has all the form fields included on
the
there.
Kitchen sink.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you just want to see, hey, what type of fields are there? What do they look like? What do they do? How do they interact? This is a good one to look at. Also very useful to figure out what markup is generated. This is probably one of the biggest pain points with web forms and marketers is the markup that's generated. Your designers will come up with some HTML and some really fancy JavaScript and this, that, the other. Oh, guys, can you just, make web forms for marketers look like this and do this? And you're like, oh yeah, it seems simple enough, very, very standard HTML. And then you sort of dive into this module, and you're like, you'll get a few gray's hair if you haven't pulled them out already. So just get ready for that one. That's when the fun really starts. But it's this form's a good one for seeing all the different types of forms that are on there. Let's spin that up on a.
Earlier, you had mentioned that it's using Bootstrap. Where do you often see those styles applied?
So there's a few different versions. So what did I say it was? So much earlier versions didn't use anything. They just had some custom. Let me just find this slide. Here you go. This is it. So much earlier versions were just using a custom CSS file, pretty standard stuff, jQuery UI, and jQuery and jQuery UI for the forms, for the JavaScript and the forms interaction and the validation and that kind of stuff. Sitecore 7.2, and I can't recall which update it is, but one of the later ones, so last July, August. Update 5 or update 6, I can't recall exactly which version. And 8.1 has Bootstrap, and I can show you some of the templates. I'll show you some of the templates when we dive into some code around the Bootstrap and a couple of config settings that you can tweak. There is a reason I'm using 8.03 for the demo. It's the one I've used. I haven't used Bootstrap, like I said, and I find that the amount of control and finesse you get over the markup is much, much better in this very version. I'll dive into some code and it'll make a bit more sense and see how it all sort of hangs together. So here's all your listy types, as you'd expect. There's some checkboxes and radio lists and multi-lists and so on and so forth. So there's some sample forms in here. By default, all your forms will go into this website folder. As you can see, I've had them redirected up to my site, and I'll show you something with this in the code later. And this is probably the section that you'll be interacting with most. So here you have all your save actions. Worth just familiarizing yourself with them, even if you don't use them. There's some useful things you can kind of steal from them a little bit. One thing that always catches me up is this send email action. So you'll go in, you'll install the module, you'll attach a send email message action to your form, and then you realize that your emails aren't working, and you check your logs, and there's something about example host. So you come in here, that's not what I want. I'll delete this, and it still doesn't work. And the reason is when you attach an action to a form, try and find this. It actually copies the values into the parameters of that form. So in here, it will copy in the host and the default from address. So if you're going to use the default send message, first thing you should do is come in here and either make a copy of it or delete this. It uses Sitecore's config factory magic to populate these into the class, and there's a few hidden ones. One of them is include attachments, for example. So if you set that to false, and then you've got a form with a file upload field in there, it will not send that as an attachment of that message. So one of the common ones is probably for job listings. Send us, apply for this job, attach your CV. So what you typically want is you'd want a email going to your HR department with the attachment, and so and so has applied for this job, and here's the CV that they attached. And you'd probably want to send something to the person applying to the job, but there's no point in reattaching their own CV back to them. So you'd probably want a separate send action and a separate email going to them saying, thank you for applying for the job, we'll be in touch with you soon. So make copies of those. There's a bunch of other ones in here, so some of them are I haven't really used many of them apart from send email, tell a friend, register conversions, custom actions. So you can create a custom save action, literally just point it to your own assembly and your own class. Make sure you inherit from save action, I think it is, and implement the members, and off it goes. You don't need an MVC type. It's all done server side, so not quite sure why that's there. Just be aware of this box here. What this does is, if it's a client action, it will run the save action on the CD server. And if it's not a client action, it will try to run that on the CM server. And the CM server action makes sense when you have, for example, a create item action. So the user's done something, submitted something. You want to create some sort of record in your Sitecore instance. I don't know if you'd want to, but just as an example, or you want to go and run something on the CM or kick off a separate process, then you want that client action to actually, you don't actually want it to be a client action, you actually want it to be a CM action. So client action actually means CD server in this instance. So there's a whole bunch of hidden parameters in those ones. I'm not aware of any lists of these. I'm not sure, Mike, if you're aware of any lists of these hidden parameters in the web forms module.
No, I don't think there's a list of of them anywhere.
Yeah, that might actually be quite a useful list to gather.
I think you have to like actually just use .NET Reflector and just go look at the
Yeah,
code, try to
yeah,
figure it
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think somebody's gonna have to do that. Get an intern or something. Um,
out. Right.
so some of these have got. There you go. There's one here, for example, host from message type is body HTML. So you can kind of figure some of them out. So I think this is one that I haven't seen listed anywhere. I just kind of found out from a colleague way back and just kind of recall something along the lines of, oh yeah, there was an action that did something. But you can create your own as well if you're creating custom safe action. It's nothing too complex. There are some form verification actions here as well. So the default one on all forms is assess security risk. This will throw a bit of a wobbler if the user enters HTML or angle brackets or XML into the form when they're trying to submit it, and it doesn't handle it very gracefully. I believe Sitecore have got a patch if you want to remove that, and it actually will then encode the HTML into what you'd expect it to, into the actual HTML codes. Probably nothing to see in system. Validation, you've got your default validators in here. Again, just very standard kind of Sitecore stuff. You've got some default error messages in there. Validator type, dynamic versus static is where it appears. I think this makes sense if you've ever used the ASP.NET validators as a similar kind of option for dynamic versus static. Again, you can create your own ones here. Fairly simple, just use reflector again or .peak or whatever you're using and just break in. There's nothing too complex. This is probably the most common one that you're going to be using is this regex one. And that can handle most things, I think, the regex one. I'm going to skip ahead and go to metadata quickly. So one of the things we had here were these CSS classes, and those CSS classes feed from here, half section, 1/3. You can add your own ones in here, and it's really useful actually because if you want to attach some JavaScript behaviors, you can just create a CSS class, tell the users to add that CSS class to that field, and you can then trigger some JavaScript type behaviors, hide sections of the form, show sections of the form, do some other clever stuff, whatever you want to do. There's various other ones here. You probably don't need to know about most of those. Some color schemes in there, credit card types. I think Mike has obviously been using this to collect users' credit card type details. I know he's got a blog post on encrypting or blanking out everything but the last 4 characters, for example.
Right.
Yeah. So and then here you've got your different field types. So those are the ones that we saw on the drop list. We can go in, we can create our own. And again, just specify the assembly. This assembly and class actually is not too important if you're doing MVC. What's important is this one, and these two are used for the web forms version of the module. So it's actually this one that you really care about. I don't think I've even been a while since I used those web forms ones. So let's jump you into some code. Show you a couple of little bits. If you're doing local testing, can you see that okay? Do you want to scroll a bit, Mel? There you go.
Yep, looks good.
If you're locally, be sure to turn off the robot detection, because there's some algorithms and stuff that's gone in the background. So you'll be turning these robots on, trying to submit these forms for testing locally, and particularly the analytics, and trying to figure out where it is, where it isn't, and then all of a sudden that data isn't going in. Turn it off. Simple answer. I think if you install Sitecore using SIM, there's a option in SIM to actually also turn off the robots, and it will automatically add in a patch config for you. It's got Sitecore or analytics.robots disabled or something like that. The save action that I showed you earlier, the send email save action, that the default one had the host name specified. If you don't specify the host name, it will fall back to whatever the Sitecore setting is for that host name. And the default form, default form at the bottom has a entry for the website for the forms route. That points to the website folder in the down here in this one. If you want to specify your own, just patch in the ID of whatever for your whatever that form is for your site. So this ID is this one here. So if you're running a multi-site implementation, you can have each of the forms for each of the sites go into different buckets. And then when you go into this one, and when you go to select a form, you'll get these two sections, and it's where these forms are being picked up from. For each site, it will pick up from each from its own specific folder. Now I haven't got a connection string here, but within the default form config, there's a setting here, WFM connection string, and this WFM is the value. So in the older versions, which did use SQL Server, and the brand new version is Sitecore 8.1, it does use SQL Server. You'll need to add in if you want to store to SQL Server, you'll need to add in the connection string for it. And the way you do that is to match that connection string. Just add in a WFM connection string and add it to your server with the usual details. You also need to specify a remote WFM service on your CD servers. So that client action that I showed you earlier, if that client action is disabled, what will happen is it will call this WFM service, which essentially does a callback to your CM, your master server, to the Web Forms for Marketers service, specify the username and the password, and the save action is then triggered and run on the CM server. And this is the connection string it uses. I think there's an entry for it in here as well somewhere. Remote forms service. And you can also find all the pipelines and things that it uses within for the Web Forms for Marketers module. So there's a few in here that are probably of interest: form upload, success action. There's an email, a process message, which is the one that sends the email. There's a few others in there. I've got a couple of patches in here, you can see. So in order to, let's show you some code. So save actions, they're not too difficult. Just create an action that implements iSave action. In the older version of Web Forms and Marketers, it's a different interface that you need to inherit from. Again, just crack open .peak. It's not very difficult. In the newer version, it's a different save action again. Let's see if I can find that window. You have a look in here. There's you need to inherit from WFFM save action in update 6 and 8.1. The fields are a bit of a nuisance to get at because obviously the fields are dynamic, so you end up with a bunch of fields in the adapted result list, which you then need to loop through. They're stored in key value pairs. If you're using one of the cleverer save actions, then for example, in our current project, we have a custom save to CRM action with a custom editor. The editor actually, most of the code I ripped off from the create item. These editor screens are sheer UI, so not speak yet. So they're still actually pretty easy to work with. You can just literally just copy one of those and almost rip it off to create your own same mapping editor. But the problem with the mappings is you then need to get that here in order to then call your code and call your REST service or call your backend systems or whatever you need to do. So it's a little bit tricky here. I think I've got a blog post on Stack Overflow that sort of gives some sample code. If anyone's interested, so I'll have a look there or ping me a message and I'll send you a link to that code. But it's generally not that difficult. It's name value pairs. You can then do a whole bunch of stuff with it. Have I got in here? Let's see UI is not needed. The fields. So I've added a couple of fields in. I don't know if you noticed that on over here. I've got a hidden token field and a single line text with placeholder. Nothing too clever. So here the placeholder input field literally just inherits from a single line text field. There's literally nothing going on there. The only thing it is doing is this placeholder input field here, where in this instance I kind of cheated. I just took the text that was entered by the user as the default text and just placed that into the placeholder text, just extending it using the standard kind of MVC controls here. The hidden token field, nothing clever here. It's just a hidden field value. There's a field ID and a value. Token field itself, in this instance, we had placed the form on a standard values, and it was on things like blog posts and job descriptions and articles and contact, that kind of stuff. Stuff which is created, news articles and that kind of stuff. Stuff which is created repeatedly. But because it's on the standard values and it's always the same save action and always the same email that it's going to, there was no way of knowing which page that the user was actually looking at when they were looking at that when they filled out that form. The way I got around it was just actually add in a hidden token field, and here I'm just literally just putting in the full URL of the page in a hidden URL, in a hidden input value, storing the ID or short ID or the title, and then we can then use that in our, because that's now a field that's added to the form, we can then use that in our sender's email action and then put it in as a field in that email that gets sent to the editors. There's nothing to really hook up here. Literally just make sure your hidden token field is named correctly and inherits correctly from the right field type, and it just is automatically hooked up. There's nothing really too clever going on. One of the things you'll probably want to do is tweak the look and feel of the markup. Now this is it's a bit of a tricky one, really. So back in the day when it was just pure web forms, it was a bit tricky because everything was server controls. So all the HTML and all the markup that's generated was always from some C# code in the code behind. So if you want to just tweak the code and add in a wrapping div or an inner italic field or a little CSS class here, you had to just literally create another C# class, inherit from whatever default control you're going to inherit from, and then override a whole bunch of stuff to generate some markup. It was from the end users, from the content editor's point of view, I mean, it makes no difference to them, right? They just select a field from a drop list. But from a developer's point of view, it wasn't very pretty. Now with the MVC versions, they added these editor templates. Now I've just grabbed these out of the default package and sort of I haven't quite bunged it into my project, but we have done that before. Literally just throw in the fields, and here you go. It's one of the default fields that are on there, and you can just go in and you can remove this span, or one of the usual ones is the asterisk for the required is in the wrong field. Actually, what I want that much more over here with the title. So literally you could just take the code. It's just a razor view that you can just adapt it to how you want. You got all the different field types here, as you can see. So that should be fairly straightforward. You've got a capture, you've got your checkbox lists and date pickers and so on and so forth. These are probably the slightly cleverer ones, which are the sections, which didn't quite cover sections earlier, but essentially you're able to create add sections into your field. There you go, add a section. You can add your sections into these fields. You've got a form model itself. Again, some of you sort of go through these views, and a lot of this stuff makes sense, from what we're just seeing. Is it an Ajax MVC form? If so, we're going to need to load in some JavaScript, some jQuery. Here's just is it show the intro? Is it show the footer? Is it just has the form been submitted? So it's all fairly straightforward. Fortunately, with the new Bootstrap version, it's going to drag in this. Oh, actually, I think I have. I thought I did. All right, 8.1. Right, so in 8.1 and update 6 and 7.2 with this Bootstrap version, it kind of sounds really cool, right? You now have Bootstrap, and that gives you some really nice flexibility and stuff. And I've been playing around with this for the past few days, particularly, and sort of looked at it very briefly earlier. But one of the issues I'm finding is you now end up with a much more lighter version of these fields. So what we just saw was this field model, and I've got quite a lot of stuff here that I can actually play with. But with the Bootstrap, it's not. It's just it heads on over to a helper, HTML helper extension in the Web Forms for Marketers module, which will generate the markup that needs to be done for this particular field. And most of those. Some are a bit less than others, but yeah, I'm a bit. To me, this kind of feels like it's going back a bit to the web forms days where I've now got to crack open code to just make fairly simple styling changes, whereas before I can just add in some, quite literally just come in here and add in some custom styles in here. I'm no longer able to do that in the same kind of way and edit the markup in the same kind of way. So with that in mind, I think the best piece of advice I can give anybody using the Web Forms for Marketers module is don't have your designers style the HTML. Instead, use one of these default forms that I just showed you. Get your designers to look at this, look at the markup that's generated from this, and then try to style around it. And try to, with the Bootstrap version, it should be a bit easier, but try and kind of use the generated markup without unless you really, really need to then go in and actually start making edits and that kind of stuff. That's it on the form. So with that in mind, I had some other notes. I'm trying to think of what else. Right. So one of the things I've missed so far is the reports. I'm going to pick one that I know I have some data in. So here's a very simple form. It only had a single field on there. I didn't really do anything too clever with this, but each form will have a you get these nice analytics reports, and each of the fields will have response values as to where it's increased, decreased, what's been filled out, not filled out, and you'll have various analytics for each user that's appeared. Obviously, I'm running locally. I'm not doing any. There's no user logins. There's nothing. So it's all essentially anonymous users. You could obviously save that user information as soon as they registered or filled in a form. You've got their email address. You can then start gathering this stuff across lots of reports. You can also export the data to Excel. That open. And you get all these form reports. I only had a single form field in here, but otherwise you'd get the multiple fields in here and do some clever stuff with it. Also got this value, which is a dropouts, which is what I was talking about earlier. So if users are going into the form and start filling the form in and then don't complete it, then you'll get some nice analytics on that. In the earlier versions of Sitecore, so 7.2, there used to be a additional set of tabs. I wonder if I can pull one up. I think I might have a picture of it somewhere, but there used to be an additional set of tabs, and what that would do is give you some access to some additional reports, like the dropout reports, and use the old Silverlight type reporting that it had in Sitecore, and you could see what values users had entered before they left. And that information is still available, except it's just not very accessible. So it is stored in Mongo, and we saw earlier that this data was flying backwards and forwards in the background. It is available in here, and I'm gonna probably not find it, but in one of these Mongo tables, the data is stored. It's just not accessible. So that's one of the reasons I think I messaged you yesterday, Mike West, about pulling out Mongo data from using Sitecore PowerShell extensions. That's actually the specific use case I was thinking of, is to get some of these reports back in, because at the moment it's just essentially
a number.
A number, yeah. So it's not as useful as it was, but having spoken to several people, nobody had even realized it had gone missing. So I'm not really sure how much those reports are actually really used. I think most people just like to receive the emails, the marketing people that like to receive the emails, and they're happy with doing that. So yeah, one of the many things in there. I think we can carry on with some slides. So we've covered quite a lot in here, hopefully. Should have covered most of these, I think. So the permissions that you were asking about earlier, there's two main roles. There's a Sitecore client forms author and the Sitecore marketer form author, and the exact details of those are available. This is literally just a screenshot from the docs.sitecore.net. I've actually ripped out a couple of the default Sitecore permissions, but it's on there. The user will need rights to be able to create and edit a form, but they'll also need read, write access on the actual items themselves to be able to add those, as well as the placeholders and the usual kind of stuff. So some gotchas, just some quick start stuff. Be sure to add the visitor identification on your page, which will need to go into the head tag, I believe, or somewhere on the page, maybe in the footer tag. It adds a link to a CSS file, which essentially is to detect against robots. There's also a web forms version of this as an SC visitor identification tag or something or other. Be sure to add the CSS and the JavaScript. And by that, I mean on your page in the non-bootstrap versions, there's these 4 script bundles that you need to add. Well, you need to add the first 2, and the first 2 is what adds the JavaScript for the validation and that kind of stuff. And the second 2 are just styling. So if you don't want to add the second 2, just remove them or delete them or do whatever you want, and then just handle the styling yourself. If you want to be lazy, like I have been today, then add those in. But if your front-end guys are too lazy, then beat them up. It's not very nice styling. The XDB data and those aggregated form reports, be careful. Just because a user has submitted a form doesn't mean it's going to end up in the XDB straight away. It won't flush to the XDB until the session has ended. If you're on the old SQL Server ones, then that's fine. It's just in there straight away. But the XDB ones will need it to be done on. You'll need to abandon the session, and for testing purposes, just create yourself a abandon.aspx, and some people probably beat me up. I couldn't quite get this to work, so you can just abandon the session locally for testing purposes, just to see that data go into Mongo, and then you can keep an eye on the logs and wait for the aggregator to kick off, and then refresh your reports. I mentioned that robots detection for local development, so turn that off. Otherwise, you're gonna be forever wondering why that data is not ending up in the in Mongo either. Keep an eye on your logs. make sure the forms front end won't give you any clues. If if the SMTP is not reachable, or just say sorry, there was an error. Please try again later. So keep an eye on the logs. There's usually lots and lots of useful information in there. If you get really stuck, I don't know, use some sort of tail program. I use Beartail. Just keep it open, see what's happening. The save actions I mentioned, they are copied. They're not linked. So if you've added a save action to a form, and then you go and make a change to that save action, it's not linked. The data that's already in there is essentially copied into the parameters of that form. That send email action is a classic one. You'll add it, and then you'll say, oh yeah, I remember there was that host name in there. I'll remove it, and it's still not sending. You've got to effectively delete the save action from your form and re-add it, which is quite annoying. If you've got an email attached to it, which you're then going to copy those out and then paste those back in, and it starts to get a bit, annoying. It's a bit annoying. So, as I mentioned, the AJAX is quite heavy. It's not using nice JSON objects. It's quite heavy, and it's just essentially doing a full page reload. That form selector I mentioned, so the default one doesn't have that in there. I've got a blog post on my site, grab it from there. I just want to give you another quick hint that the other classic one I see is people will go and add a form, and I'll come here. I don't know why this form thing is still in here. They'll come and select a form from here. And, okay, yeah, cool, the form's on there, it shows, it displays, and then you'll go to submit the form and it'll throw up an error. Make sure you can pretty much ignore this form ID one. I think it's a throwback from the old web forms days. I don't know if it's still used. I'm going to assume it's still used by the web forms version of the module, but in the MVC version, make sure you've got this data source set, because this is the one that it actually uses. And as you can see, when you click browse, it's not your standard data source browser that you would with any other component. It's a specific web forms version of the browser. All right. Caching. Ooh, caching. Be careful about caching. If you've set your form to be cached, it will render very nicely, but your data will go nowhere. Kind of, again, classic. Even if you're using the AJAX version of this, by the way, I think, as far as I can tell, it's this classic kind of old web forms version where if it's cached, it's never going to hit the code behind, and therefore it's never going to hit the save actions and the validators and so on and so forth. So make sure your form itself is not cached. That might mean that you've got to kind of rethink your placeholder / component strategy to be able to cache things around the form. And final one, beware of bugs. There's a few. I'm not sure the last time there's a particular stable version of this forms that I've actually seen, but there are a few. If you always, well, as with sort of all things Sitecore, always have a clean version of Sitecore and the forms module installed somewhere, just so that you can test things out to see, is it a bug or am I doing something a bit wacky? At the moment, I'd probably say your best bet is just to head on over to the Slack chat, and head on over to the Web Forms for Marketers room. There's a WFFM room. Ping somebody a message, what version of Sitecore you're using, what version of the Web Forms for Marketers module you're using, and somebody will probably have a incident support ticket number. But yeah, there's a few wacky ones in there. When you are installing the marketers module, particularly if you're on an existing project, and quite common for people to restrict the item names, to remove dashes because they're using encode name replacements. If you try to do that with the Web Forms for Marketers module, it's going to throw this error because there's an item in there or several items in there with dashes. Also, your form names. Make sure you don't put dashes in your form item names either, because it throws a weird error as well. Something with it's a really obscure message about something with invalid character at string character 61 or 67 or whatever it is, and it's a really weird one. And it's literally just because it's got a dash in the name, it goes a bit crazy. I'm sure there's a couple of blog posts on that as well. So when to use forms? Simple, really, it comes down to when you've got simple forms. The kind of contact us, apply for this job, send a message to your friend or whatever, and forms that need to be updated by your marketing team and your content editors fairly frequently. They're constantly adding new newsletters or tweaking the labels to do X or Y, or you want to use it for lead generation, and it's just this month we want to run this kind of competition maybe, and they just want some emails going out and that kind of stuff. With the with the various sort of save actions, it's really easy to extend out some of those to save it to CRM and send an email and also sign the user up to this newsletter, and you can use some sort of one of the Salesforce connectors, or there's the new Sitecore Salesforce connector as well. I haven't used that one, but there's another module which I've linked to at the end, which is a Web Forms for Marketers to Anything, which uses REST services. You can configure REST services to sort of just throw the data at, or just write your own. And it's useful when you need to execute the actions on the content management server. Essentially, the request will go to the CD server, and it just passes it back on to the content management server, and you can have something happen there. Upload an image, add a CV into the media library, or create an item or some user data, or associate something or other. So it's useful for just using that mechanism to not open too much up, but just let the pure .NET code handle that for you in between the two. You're going to want to use custom forms when you want something really lightweight, some really lightweight AJAX-driven forms. Even one thing I haven't shown you is like multi-step forms, quite literally because you can't do it out of the box with a module. The only way you can do it is a kind of faux multi-step, which is to use sections and apply CSS classes, and then effectively hide and show sections using JavaScript. I think Mike wrote a save to session save action. That might be one way to do it, but effectively there's no joined up way of doing that. So if there's some sort of forms in there that you need multi-stepped, and or X, Y decisions made on a form, you're not going to have that. The other thing missing is probably dependent field selectors. So if the user selects the USA, then show a states drop down to allow the user to just select that, or change the regex to validate on zip codes rather than postal codes. One's numerical, one's alphanumerical. It's slightly different format, so you don't have that kind of stuff. But a lot of times you can kind of work around that kind of stuff by using some JavaScript, adding some custom CSS classes, and then kind of using your JavaScript to kind of fake it essentially. If you need reports, I don't know why I put that in the custom section. Should have been in the other one. If you need reports from your web forms or marketers, you're going to want to use from your forms. You're going to want to use a custom, the default module. That's in the wrong section. Sorry. Yeah. But if you need those reports, those how many users filled this in, how many dropouts did we have, then you're gonna need that. And if you got goals and that kind of stuff, you're gonna need it on the other one. For things like login controls and stuff, I tend to use custom forms. There is a login save action. One of the save action was a login one. With the web forms, it's a bit tricky. It's difficult to put two forms in there on the same page because everything is executed. A couple of blog posts on that about ways around it and stuff, but generally I find it easier just to handle that yourself. There's usually some third-party systems that integrations that you probably want to authenticate against, or some internal systems, or a different database. If it's a Sitecore-based user, it's probably the forms are a good one. The web forms for marketers is a good one to use. I'll give you some directly log the user in, for example. And with complex forms, if you got anything complex, then yeah, just stay away. Just create custom ones. It's going to save you a lot of time. It's going to be much easier to debug. You can add in things like unit testing, which I have no idea how you would even get to unit test these web forms modules and field actions and so on and so forth. They're so loosely bound together that I don't really think there's going to be any way to do that with any great certainty. Anything to add on that, Mike Reynolds?
No.
Yeah. And that's it. Forms. So if you've got a bunch of questions, and go ahead. I'm just going to jump in and try and see if anybody's trying to harass me on any of the channels, if I can find which tab I'm on.
Someone had asked if there was a way to have a different connection string name than WFFM, or instead of WFM.
WFM, yes, there is. So in that connection string, I showed you. Oh, there's a connection string. So it's called WFM, but in the forms config, there is a setting, WFM connection string. So you can just patch it. I just go in here, and I can just patch that to whatever I like. And as long as my connection string here matches that, we're good. And same with the remote service one. There you go. This remote service one, again, if you don't like that, patch it in, and just patch it in and add in a standard kind of Sitecore patch, and update your connection string to whatever you want for that remote service one. Let me try and find my coming thick and fast. Slack is very empty.
Everyone must be out partying.
Okay. We've got one question, so I've either done a very good job or nobody cares.
Yeah. I think one of the distinctions you helped make was the fact that Web Forms for Marketers doesn't do the like a wizard. Essentially, it doesn't do a wizard. If you were to want to use the module as a way to capture like someone applying for a job, you'd have to have really one form and then the CSS to manage the different sections that they're filling out. Whereas a custom form would be where you would go to the next page, next page, next page, and finally. Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So, say the only way I can, only way we've dealt with that, but is by essentially adding sections here and managing it. So you've got your part one and add a new section, and then part two, and so on and so forth, and then apply a CSS in here, and then essentially drive the user along. But the form is still there, right? The whole form is still loaded, and it's not quite driven, and so you can't make decisions based on if the user has filled in this, then do that. I'm not aware of. Yeah, that's not possible really. So I'm sure some of the other modules will do that. One thing to note is I first used this module back in 2010, and it looks exactly the same. And nothing has really changed on this on it. So you get small tweaks. It's the biggest change was probably the support for MVC, and then the next change has been recently with the Bootstrap. Hopefully, it will get a bit of a rewrite at some point, kind of like the email campaign manager has recently, and we can then start to get a bit more back on track with how Sitecore has been going with its experience editor, and maybe some drag and drop type fields, and something more similar to like SurveyMonkey or something like that, where you've got a bit more options and a bit more flexibility. It's a bit more modern in how it works. I mean, even things like adding 2 buttons here, for example, you can't do that without some hacks.
What would you say is the next feature that you wish it would have?
I think from a marketer's point of view, if they just had this screen as we're seeing and some drag drop controls in here, so being able to just drag in a field and name it first name, and just appear. I think it's more natural in terms of adding fields and editing fields and like radio lists and so on and so forth, rather than at the moment with radio lists, for example. Edit this. You got your list here, and then you can go in here and you can add it. It's okay, it's all right. It does the job very well, and I think for the users that know exactly how to manage this and are familiar with this, it's actually pretty easy, right? But I think being able to sort of manage a lot of this from the front end would be much nicer. I personally would like to see the fields go back. I'm going to have to dig into this Bootstrap stuff, but I'm not a big fan of it at the moment from what I've seen. If you are using the Bootstrap version, then there is an option to turn off the Bootstrap CSS styling. There's an option in here somewhere. It's still bootstrapped. The controls are still done using the extension helper, but it adds much more work than a simple change to a razor view. So for me, I think that's probably what I'd like to see. And there's a few other things, a few others. There's the multi-step, I think, is pretty standard in most form generators at the moment.
I feel like an expert at it now.
Yeah, you can. I'll send you my forms. You can create them for me.
So where do you see Sitecore going next with this? Do you see those kinds of features taking place? Are they maybe taking in feedback but not making any announcements yet at what they're going to do next?
Yeah, so I mean, as you know, over the past sort of couple of years, especially Sitecore have been very receptive, right? They are, we're getting us as MVPs, we're getting early releases into these modules and the Sitecore, and we get to play around with it a bit, give feedback. We did have a session last year, August, and I think it lasted for about an hour or so with Sitecore team, some of the web forms to marketers, module developers, and they did take feedback from us. There's a thread in the MVP section of the forum. I can ping you that so you can have a read of that, and I think there's a recording of that which the MVPs can have a watch. So you can go through that and watch if you are interested in what we discussed and where people would like to see the module go. But I think it probably open it back up again. I think at least I'd like to open that discussion back up again with some of these changes, and hopefully we can get a bit more of a roadmap as to where Sitecore themselves are going with this module, because it is, I think it's probably one of the most popular modules that's used in Sitecore. It's probably the number one module, I'd say.
More than SPE?
Oh, well, obviously not more than SPE, but I think with the as soon as these marketers see the reports from SPE, this thing is going to tell you skyrocket.
All right. I don't see any more questions from the Twitter.
Yeah, I haven't seen much. All right, that's good. Anybody tweet me? Nobody tweeted me directly either.
Yeah.
All right.
Excellent. Well, this was great. I appreciate you taking the time to share with us what you know about it, and helping Mike finally get me up to speed on marketers.
Yeah, I think Mike deserves a beer after this.
This is great. Cool. I don't have any more questions.
Any expert interjections from you, Mike?
No, you did a really excellent job. You covered a lot.
Yeah. I tried to be a bit thorough. I know there's a lot in there. There are a lot of nuances in there. The thing that always gets me are these like hidden parameters and stuff. If I ever have some time, I might actually just start cracking open that DLL and trying to pull them all out. But you kind of just use the bare minimum of what you need to, and you kind of look at what you need to, and then you kind of just sweep it under the carpet and hope no one ever calls you up again to a certain extent.
Right.
Have you used the module with the Habitat project?
No, I haven't. I haven't actually. I wonder how much of the Habitat rules this breaks actually. Probably all of them, I'd say. I can't see why it wouldn't work though. Say hey, someone's messaging me. So I can't see why it wouldn't work with Habitat. Say I just threw this into launch Sitecore, as you saw. I didn't do anything aside from just install the module install launch Sitecore, install the module. It is a self-contained module in its own respect, as how Sitecore works. Don't dig into the code too much; you might cry a little bit, So.
Excellent. I guess new blog post to follow after this presentation.
Yeah, I've got to get up to speed on Habitat and get over the debate of which ORM to use. But
yeah, excellent. Cool. Well, thank you for your time.
No worries. All right. I hope that's been useful. So give me a shout. I'm always available on Twitter. Send a message on Slack. Go into the Web Forms for Marketers room. There's plenty of guys on there. We'll be more than happy to help. And yeah, there's lots of knowledge on the module. I don't think I can't really say anybody's actually an expert on this. We all kind of use it in anger and in jest, but I'm not sure anyone's going to be admitting to being an actual expert, but we've all got lots of knowledge between us, and yeah, be able to help.
Who from Sitecore would you direct questions to?
I don't.
I don't know who works on this. It'd probably be best. I don't know. I guess it depends on. I don't know. I would ask the community definitely. If you want to ask somebody at Sitecore, probably file a support issue. I mean, and they could direct to the correct person.
Yeah, I think with all the other products, we often find who's the guy or the girl that you go ask those questions, and I've never quite heard that with the web forums. It's like, well, someone's working on it, and they released a new version.
Yeah, exactly.
They're
It's a
often-
surprise! Here's some new features that you didn't know you were gonna get.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully it's not like Twitter where everyone's asking for the ability to edit and they just give you longer tweets. It's like, we're asking for this feature and you give us something else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
this
I
is
guess
great.
I guess if you just extend your tweet, it'll just get hidden in everything, so you never need to edit it, right? So
Yeah.
just throw the dictionary in there.
Yeah, this is good.
Well, we can try and find out. I don't know if this is one of the active modules they're working on, or if it's just small updates and things. Because I know Email Campaign Manager, for example, has gone through, or Email Experience Manager, as it's now called, has gone through a fairly substantial rewrite, ground up rewrite from what I hear. So we can kind of poke and prod, and hopefully somebody will pick it up.
Yeah, maybe Mike will. Mike will be our
Yeah.
dedicated support.
Yeah. I think
Awesome.
Mike wants to keep his hair. He's still got a fairly full hair.
Yeah, it's turning gray.
Yeah. It reminds me, I was kind of a consultant on a project. I wasn't a developer specifically, and the team was trying to evaluate whether they should use Webform for marketers or they should use, or build a custom web form. And then how did that interact with Microsoft Dynamics connector, and so it was kind of a big deal to figure out how each one of those modules work, or to build something custom, and we ended up with essentially mimicking the Web Forms for Marketers module, but it didn't turn out the way we hoped it would. To have this ability to create custom fields and not have a little wizard to do that made it complicated for the marketers. So I think, kind of to your point, if you're looking for something that's just real easy to do from kind of a wizard form, then the Web Forms for Marketers is the way to go. But the more complex you make it, you should really evaluate how much time you'll invest in that versus a very solution-specific, product, and then solve your one problem and do it really well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the concept of Web Forms for Marketers is really good. It's really amazing. It sort of fits the bill exactly as you'd expect. I think there's some implementation things which would just make our life a lot easier, and then there's some updates that need to come in to kind of bring it up to kind of modern day expectations, if you like, and what a lot of the other sites are doing. I mean, I'm sure you could just Google forms generators and SurveyMonkey and that kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
there's plenty of sort of case studies essentially, for how it should work and what's easy to use and what's not. So, but the whole concept of it is great. You just go in, throw a form on, it starts gathering the analytics for you. There are some rules, and you can integrate the rules engine into it to do certain things as well. Like if a user has gone to has already registered on your site, and you have the details, and you know what, just hide those fields if we know who they are, and you can start putting that kind of stuff in, and the customizations are fairly simple. Yeah, adding a save action it can be a little bit tricky. You just need to know how it works. And then it's okay, it's cool. We'll just add a class in, and there you go. I've got a new save action. Add in an extra custom editor in, and mapping screens, and it really just drives the user along. So there's a lot of power in there. I think it just needs a little bit of love and attention at the moment.
Would you see that this be a module that Sitecore open up to the community, like post it on GitHub, and then the community contribute to it? Would that be a valuable thing, or probably not?
I don't think so. Not in its current state. I think it's sort of grown up over so many years. There's probably so much legacy code in there, which, I mean, for all practical purposes right now, we can just decompile it and we can see how it works. What would probably be useful from Sitecore's point of view is to provide, if they were to do that, is to provide some documentation of how the module itself fits together internally, which we could then take and rewrite it essentially. But I think if it was to be re-looked at, then it would be, especially by the community, I think it would be probably rewritten from the ground up, pretty much.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there'd be too much rework, or I guess the concern for backwards compatibility. If you start from ground up, then you don't have to worry about just Sitecore 6.0 work with it or anything like that.
Yeah, the migration might be a bit painful. Or maybe you just create a Web Forms for Marketers 2 module, WFM 2 module, and say, hey, with this has got breaking changes, but I can't really see that happening. As I said before, there was, with the move to MVC and Cycle 7, there were a lot of people waiting to upgrade just purely down to this module. So compatibility I think, would be a big issue going forward.
I just had an idea. I have a question about the actions that take place on the delivery and actions that take place on the management server. What's the kind of percentage of things that you only have happen on a delivery server versus a management? Because I think in a particular scenario that we could be in is we have our delivery servers hosted in a DMZ environment, and the database between the DMZ or the delivery server and the management server, there's completely separate databases. And how do you get kind of interactions between those two environments?
So the remote WFM connection string, which I showed you, that's what you need to configure. But obviously that makes a call to the content management server. It's a web service call.
Okay.
So you'd need to open up port 80, maybe use ACL rules to only limit CD to CM connectivity or whatever you're going to do, or use some other lockdown. There is obviously you've got to specify the username and password in the connection string. The save actions, I mean, it really depends what you're doing. If you don't need to write anything back to the master database, and this is the reason you have this connection string, is if you need to write something back to the master database, you have to call back to the CM server. If you're not, then it's fine. You can just do everything on the CD server. If it's just send an email, you can do that from the CD server. If it's go and save this user's data in an external CRM system, Salesforce, or log a Marketo call, or whatever you're going to do, again, that's fine. You can just do that from the CD server. There's no reason for the callback to the CM server. The data stored into Mongo at the moment, so that's configured on the CD server. Literally the only reason is because you should not be configuring your CD server should not have access to master, and that's the only reason you're making the callback.
Okay, so maybe a solution would be you'd have a scheduled task running from the management server, and it would read into the delivery database and pull out what it cares for,
Yeah.
whatever you're wanting to do, you just do it on some sort of scheduled basis rather than a real-time update.
Yeah, sure. That'd be one way to do it. I mean, if you want to create a custom save action, you could just throw it into a different Mongo store or whatever. That's also another way of doing it. But yeah, that'd probably be one way of doing it. I'm not sure how you would then, if you need to then act on that data as if a save action was acting on it. I'm not sure how you would trigger that from a scheduled task, but you'd then be able to at least access that data.
Yeah. And then to be clear, I recall you saying that a previous version of the module, the database, was it the analytics database? I forgot what was the name of the actual database that's attached in SQL Server, but that was on SQL Server, and then a newer version they put it in XDB in the Mongo database. And did they completely bring it back to SQL Server, or was it you have the option of one or the other?
You have the option. You have the option of doing that. I think there's a blog post from Alan Coates who brought back the SQL database for Sitecore 7.5 for the web forms. You obviously still have no analytics if you don't have the XDB, but it was one of those. I'm not sure if it's the same case with you with the clients and stuff you're working with, but there's a lot of people who are just essentially stuck on 7.2 because they don't want to go down the Mongo route. So with the Sitecore 8 and Sitecore 7.5, with the SQL Server not being available, and then some of the personalization issues that we saw with if analytics is turned off, you can't personalize components even down to like a GeoIP level, which has nothing to do with history. So now people can run CMS only mode, have those personalization rules, and they can now still use web forms for marketers and have a SQL Server backing and not run Mongo.
That's good to know.
Yeah, so if they're good with just running Google Analytics, then you can probably get away with it.
So we're kind of in a situation where we're not sure if we're going to use the XDB, where another product may integrate very well with our CRM. And so if we're not using Sitecore to connect to our CRM and we're using something else, and that something else provides some of the features like personalization and maybe even some forms, I think there's a balance between how much personalization should we be using in this other system, because you don't get all that data in the CMS, right? You don't get to use that historical data in the CMS to control the experience for the client. You're using some other system.
Yeah.
And the same for like a form. If you're using an iframe that's hosting the form, well, all that data just gets sucked up, goes somewhere else, and you don't get to take advantage of that. And the marketer then has to be in more than one system. So I guess there's a balance between, what products you have available and where you're investing your time in creating forms and trying to generate custom reports and so forth.
Yeah, fair enough. So there is a lot of value in there, but you're just going to have to weigh it up depending on how those forms are, depending on the requirements and the complexity of those forms. I think what you are going to lose, obviously, is those analytics that go with the form. I don't know how that works with Sitecore 8.1. That's something you need to look into. As in, how much of those analytics do you lose? Is it just a case of it will collect the data that's sent? Does it also put the dropout data, which it's sort of passing back using those background AJAX calls? Is it also storing those in SQL Server? Because at the moment those are in XDB. So you might lose that. And if you lose that, then do you lose the dropout tracking? So I don't know exactly how it works with the CMS only mode, how that affects reports and how that affects the other bits and pieces.
Yeah, that's raises a good question, because I think if you're recommending the solution to a customer of CMS only, they would need to understand what they're losing or what features are essentially unavailable to them for the module. Yeah, excellent.
I've got one screen I'm going to share, which I didn't do earlier for some reason. So just some quick links. The old SDN site, sdn.sitecore.net, actually has a couple of web forms for marketers documents on there. They're actually quite handy because they're PDFs. And those PDFs, you can download the whole thing and you can just literally look at the index and see what's in the module and just read through it or burn it or print it and burn it or whatever you want to do, you know. There's also, I've been sort of looking as part of this sort of talk, I'll start looking through the documents on the docs.sitecore.net site, and surprisingly, there's a lot of useful info on there as well. Quite well laid out, quite well put into articles and very small nugget type articles, which are very sort of bite-sized chunks. Mike's done a whole bunch of stuff, a whole series of stuff on web forms for marketers. So just go on there. He's got a whole bunch of web save actions and fields, crazy wacky stuff, and encryption, and I think he's even got one for virus scanning your attachments before they are sent in your email. So there you go.
I did that.
I was overwhelmed by that blog post. That was intense.
Yeah, but it just goes to show that it is the module itself is really extendable. You know, you can actually go and do all this stuff and go, oh, actually never actually thought about that. You know, it's cool. This blog post here is actually quite useful. There's some more information on this on the docs site, but this blog post is useful for sort of understanding the data flow and from web forms for marketers, and it's a two-parter, I think it is. And you know, where does the data end up, and you know how it gets from Mongo into being aggregated and into the reports and that kind of stuff. This is just one of the connectors. There's so many. There are quite a lot of posts out there, so I'm not sort of singling any people out here. But I haven't used this module, but it sort of came across this a few weeks ago, and it seemed really interesting, where you could effectively hook up a form to a REST endpoint. Worth a read. Have a read of that, and there's some useful stuff on there. And that's pretty much it, man. Pretty much it for me.
Oh, okay, so in that Connect Anywhere, it's basically a calls some web service or some API.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Interfaces to do that. Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I haven't used it, so all the stuff I've done have been fairly narrow, but it looked quite interesting in terms of being able to sort of open that up in terms of where users can send data to. It'd be interesting to see if there's some mapping, field mapping. Oh no, it uses the fields themselves. There's an extra field that you fill in or select when you add the field. That section on the left with the CSS classes. In this one, there's an extra field that you fill in, and you configure the endpoints, I think, and off it goes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything's possible with this module. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Again, I felt like this was a great crash course in using the module. Now I guess I feel kind of it's less daunting to think I'm going to pick up this module and start using it, you know, set up my VM and just go for it. And this video will be good to refer back to, because then I can go look at all the pieces that are in there that only someone that has gone through it once before would see, that isn't necessarily captured in the document, in the installation document.
Yeah, the document is long as well, and yeah, they're not the most funnest of things to read, right? So, and again, I'm I don't think a lot of this stuff is captured. So it's fortunately it's just one of these modules where you have to go through some pain and sort of go through some experience on it. So glad it's been useful.
Yeah. All right, thanks guys. Appreciate your time.
No worries. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Cheers.
And again, awesome job.
Cheers, Mike, and I'll catch up with you in Copenhagen. No, in London next month. Yeah. All right, guys. Speak to you soon. Cheers.
Talk to you later. Bye.